In a world of hyperconnectivity, we seem more disconnected than ever from the living world. A world of natural wonder that has its own systems in place and masters the art of coexistence. We, humans, have placed ourselves outside this way of living, but it can teach us the biggest lessons and leave us in awe. What happens when we reconnect to the nature from which we arose, move in sync with it and coexist in a symbiotic way? Will we make other decisions? Will it change the way we perceive ourselves? What and who can teach us if we are willing to listen? We invite you to be open and amazed by today's guests as they offer a glimpse into their art of coexistence. The world of science and art starts from the same stimulus, curiosity and wonder. Where science tries to understand and get answers, art throws unanswered questions and multiplies the astonishment by transferring it to others. Art has great potential to promote interest in science. These are words by Andrew Carnie, my guest today, an artist with a collection of 40 years of artwork and research, and a lot of knowledge in his back pocket. He studied chemistry and art, then zoology and psychology, and then also finished a degree in fine arts. I'm curious what drives him today and how he integrates all this knowledge in his work. Hi, Andrew. How are you today?
Hi. Yep, very good. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm super curious. Can you tell me where you are at the moment?
Yeah, so currently, because it's winter, I'm in my kind of office studio at home, where it's a little bit warmer in Winchester, in the UK, about 50 miles out of London.
I'm also asking because when we spoke previously, you mentioned that you have 3 different workspaces, and that after all these years of creating art, so this is 30 to 40 years of being an artist, they're getting a bit crowded with artworks and tools. Do you have a favorite workspace? Is there one that is more... I mean, this one, I suppose, is now your favorite because it's warm, as you say, but maybe you have one that inspires you more or where you have the better tools?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like a glorified office space where I am now, which is nice, and it's comfortable and it's warm and it's near home, so it's above home, so making coffee and everything is easier. I think my immediate response to your question was to kind of, I have a very strange space in what was an ex-marketplace office space in the middle of a car park, about 10 minutes walk from where I am now. And I do like going there, partly because I don't really have internet there. And once I shut the door, I'm kind of isolated, and it's a messy space. And it's a space I currently paint in. And so it's set up for painting, and I go and lose myself in that kind of work.
I see.
Which has its kind of origins in science, but is kind of removed from it in a way.
How so?
It's because I've tried to put away specific projects. I'm kind of away from them. I'm just reflecting on what it's like to be human, but through the lens of kind of things that come to mind, of kind of research and things that I've kind of seen, heard, or read about.
When you're in that space, you're just super focused on your personal reflections, and you go ahead with that.
I think that would be right to say, kind of references to science things and topics that I've dealt with before, but in the main, that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And in the other space is further from here. It's about half an hour drive. It's storage, and it's a kind of a making space if I need to make anything technical. And I also have a space there which is kind of completely blackout, quite a large space, which historically I would use for testing video pieces and projection pieces. It allows me to put them up, photograph them, work with them.
Yeah. And from hearing this, you're already now sharing something that I think is important to mention, is that you have so many media that you work with. It's not just painting, but then it's also video work, it's installation work, it's drawings. Do you have a favorite medium that you work with, or does this depend on the type of topic you work on?
I think it depends a bit on the topic and where I'm at. I like all of them, and I feel as though I can be inventive with all of them. I mean, I do like the act of painting. Making the slow video projection pieces, which started off really in old-fashioned slide film, really. I mean, they tend to be very tedious. I mean, they can involve a lot of cleaning of images for months, really, on the computer, and they drive me rather mad. I mean, so I like the painting, the oil painting, the large-scale painting. I also like the small-scale painting, the watercolors that I do, which over 8 or 10 years of practice, I've become quite fluent in, and I feel as though I can do it very automatically, really enjoy and really play with it. I think part of the task that I've got at the moment is learning how to paint fluently in the same kind of ways, be as rash and as carefree with it, but yet still come up with results.
Being as carefree with painting as with the video, you mean, or with some of them?
I know as carefree with the oil painting or the acrylic painting as I am with the watercolor painting.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the watercolor painting really suits me. It was difficult at first, but I've got a whole lot of practical skills, which mean it's fairly automated. I can get on and do them, and I really enjoy them.
I think the thing with the water painting is also that it's very forgiving, right? You don't have to be so precise with it sometimes.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing because historically everybody thinks, especially in the UK, that the watercolour tradition in the UK was always one of great precision and accuracy and underdrawing. And actually what I brought to it was kind of chaos in a way. And I use stencils. I use a thick German watercolour paper, which just allows a lot of abuse. And as much as I can take colour off, and you're not taught these things really. But yeah, people are very careful with it. It's also a paper that you don't need to stretch in advance, which is the history of watercolor painting, that you stretch it with brown tape and wet it and let it dry. And you don't, with paper over about 600 GMS, you don't need to do that, and that's great. One of the things I really enjoy, once all the preparation is done in the video work, one of the things I really enjoy is when I'm editing in Adobe After Effects, when I've got all of the images there. Because what I will have is I'll have several points in the video where I know things are going to be, and then I work between those points. And if you're lucky, then it gets better than you thought it would. It's better than the high points that you'd already predicted as working, and I like that. But it often happens very quickly, and suddenly, I think I've done 6 months of preparation of all the images, and then they say, I might have 2 or 3 or a month of kind of editing. And then suddenly in 2 or 3 days, I've done it. And I think, oh no. And yeah, but that's quite exciting.
Yeah, so then it all clicks, but you're actually very much looking forward to working on it.
Yes, absolutely.
In my introduction, I said that you are an artist, but I was also thinking with all the research that you do and your scientific background in chemistry, zoology, psychology, would you not also still call yourself a scientist as well?
No, well, it's an interesting point, but no, not really. Because I never, the zoology I never finished, the degree and the all of those things I kind of put aside. I left university early after 2 years of study. But I suppose, my earlier A-levels were all completed. But for that reason, I kind of feel there's some kind of difference.
Because you didn't finish it and you didn't work in it, maybe.
Yes, and that's interesting. It's just because of, I guess, the diploma, the degree, I don't have. So,
Yeah, and for that reason, you feel like you can't call yourself a scientist, but being interested in those topics and actually having studied them, does that not also make you at least a scientific mind, maybe?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I've never thought about it, but yes, potentially. Yeah, I mean, I pride myself in doing that research and kind of understanding things.
Yeah, and because another question I actually had in this direction is what makes a scientist and the artist an artist. So, where do you think lies the difference between the two, and then specifically in your work, where in your work do we see a scientific mind at work, and where do we see the artist at work?
Yeah, I think because for a lot of my work, it's kind of secondary research in a sense. I'm researching other people's papers. I'm not doing experiments myself necessarily. So I'm collecting into my world of what I want to kind of explore. So I think that's significant. And then as the artist, I'm kind of I'm not necessarily. I'm interested in portraying the mood of something and not the specifics. So I might be inaccurate, or I might use something that maybe a scientist wouldn't use as a tool or an image that doesn't quite represent the science, but represents the feel or the need I have to express something. I mean, I was always kind of very curious about a story. I went to get some photographs from a scientist of spongy brain one time, and I really thought, and I'm still sure that there is spongy brain in the skull in areas, or it's kind of aerated. But he refused to give me images because he thought that there wasn't any of that form of bone. But I wanted to talk about this kind of element in my image. It was an interesting. I managed to find the images elsewhere, so it was fine in the end.
Yeah, can you clarify that? I'm not sure if I follow. So you spoke to a scientist and you were interested in images of their research.
Spent something like 50 years studying bone, photographing it, working under the microscope. And then because my piece centered on the skull, he said I couldn't use any of his images that were of this kind of spongy type of bone. But actually, I went and found some kind of on the internet that, as far as I was concerned, were that form of bone, and got on with the piece of work in the end. But it was. I mean, in general, scientists have been extraordinarily helpful, and he was helpful. I've only had when I've kind of gone to labs and stuff, I've only had one occasion, I think, when somebody's kind of really said, no, I haven't got time to see you.
Yeah, so there are many fields of science one can look at, of course. So maybe for people that don't know your work, is it easy for you to describe what your focus is or what the topic is that most interests you?
I mean, it's all started around neurology in the brain. And I started even before I started making artworks. That was an area I was interested in. I was interested in behavior. When I went to read zoology at university, that's what I was looking at. I was very interested in behavior and how it related to brain structure. That was really the start of my work.
And then you're interested in behavior, but then seeing what that behavior looks like in the brain, in their neurological pathways.
Yes, the beginnings of that, because this goes back 30, 40 years. And I worked with Nico Tinbergen's research group, or I visited, and that was what I was interested in. When I went to read zoology at Durham University, that's the area I was, applying for, and what I thought I would come out doing. But how things change. And so that was the interest. And I think kind of that the brain and its structure was always part of my work in the early work. Gradually, I've kind of moved on to be more interested in a more general kind of aspect of science about how we're constructed more generally. Because what you realize is, this construction in the brain is going on, and all of the neurons are being positioned by chemical gradients. But then you realize that all of those things are being influenced by our interaction with the external world. So I was always fascinated by the work of Hubel and Wiesel with cats, and basically tying them down so that you couldn't move in an environment, and then their brain and their development of their optical system gets restricted. So I was fascinated by that. So this correlation between the world that we live in and the brain and its function and its form has been fascinating, but it's broadened out really to how we react with the environment, how we react with other people. Came up a lot in the heart transplant project.
But just to go back for me to make sure that I understand this correctly, so you're saying that you're interested in seeing how the brain works and how it responds in general, being a human being, and what activities you can observe, and then gradually you've gotten more interested in how these changes in what you can actually observe, what happens in your brain, are affected by surroundings. So when we interact with people, when we are walking outside, when there's external factors playing a role.
Yeah, certainly. So Magic Forest, one of the first large-scale time-based pieces I made, was centered in the brain. Then the next piece, complex brain spreading arbor, started to look at how that brain and all of those processes went on in the body.
And then can you walk us through what you then do with it? Because then you are an artist, so you're interested in this topic, and then how do you transform this or translate this into an art piece? What did you do with this work?
Well, in that work, I started making sequences of image that were to be projected that explored those kinds of changes in a transitory effect. In that first kind of period of research, I was just very interested. I think it was based on the fact that when I was doing kind of science and biology at the age of 15 and 16, I was told, in a sense, that my brain was a kind of fixed thing, that it was set up. You established your brain in adolescence. And then the research I was looking at in Richard Wingate's lab at King's and in Queen's Square, other research, everything was much more flexible. And you kind of think it's kind of maybe solid and wired like a radio, but it's not. It's a biological living matter that's changing and altering. And there was a very interesting experiments being done then on taxi drivers and bus drivers, and working out that taxi drivers, that certain parts of their brain developed because in the process of learning the routes in London, they were the mapping. Their brains were changing. So you kind of got this sense this is not a structure that's fixed. It's altering, and we can see. And this was in the area of the hippocampus. And basically, the experiment kind of looked at taxi drivers who learn many routes, and the difference between them and bus drivers in London who only learn 2 or 3 routes.
Right.
And there was an increase in the volume and the density of integration in the hippocampus in the taxi drivers. So it's fascinating. So this evidence was very prescient at the point when I was doing this work, and I suppose it was like 1999, 2000, around then.
And then you wanted to translate this into art. So can you explain what then happens in your brain when you see something that you're fascinated about, and then you decide, I want to do something with this. This is the medium I'm going to use, and this is what I want to present.
Yeah, I guess I have a picture of maybe what I want to do, but no, I think it's almost impossible to describe what happens and why. It's a matter of the kind of information that you've taken in and the structure of your brain at that time and how you put those together. I mean, I start often with drawings. I start off often with some mechanical things, some materials. I mean, in this case, I had a sense that projection was a good idea, and I started exploring. This is old-fashioned 35mm slide projection, and then for one reason or another, I ended up buying some slide dissolve equipment. And when I looked at images and how that kind of worked and how they changed, it seemed to be very like looking down a microscope, and so that translated quite interestingly. And then then there's the layers, because I use a confocal microscope to explore the brain, or the scientist I was working with, Richard, did that at that point. So there was parallels, and then I could see myself. It was quite one of the quite interesting things is that Richard very kindly offered me all of the images and things that he had, and the little clips of film. And then I couldn't use any of them in a way, because I needed some synthesis, explore it in a kind of wider area.
And what did you need for that?
In the end, I did all the drawings myself by hand. So I basically made representations of what I could see in Richard's videos. Then I could extend them and make them much more complex and more precise. It's like honing in the description, maybe coming towards, you've got the data and you're coming towards a theory. You're coming towards some kind of closer visualization of what you see in your own mind. And I was kind of very pleased. I mean, one of the things about that work was that it kind of encompassed the viewer in a kind of sculptural space as well. It was like you were in the brain, really, because I used layers of oil to project onto and was projecting from 2 sides. And there's quite an interesting effect that I only realized later was one of the fundamental aspects of the work Magic Forest, which was when the image is being projected onto the screens from behind you, you're looking at the thing as an object. But when the projector is on the other side, shining towards you, you're really the subject of being in that space. So there's this object-subject matter that's going on that I think is a very interesting one.
You played with that in that exhibition as well, that you were projecting on the viewer and you were projecting on the walls.
well, it's not on the walls, it's always on the screen, but sometimes the image is in front of you, and other times it includes you. When it's in front of you, you are in it and behind it. And there's another kind of brainy thing about those pieces of work, because they were all with the old-fashioned slide projectors. There's this Pavlov's dog thing where there's a very interesting click when the projectors change slide, and then because it's a dissolve, there's a waiting bit. So you're waiting for the award of the next slide, and you just get kind of completely engaged in it.
So with every click, you're triggered.
There's something else. There's something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had a few people come into things and get caught up in them in a kind of magical way. I mean, I remember I did a show with 3 pieces, and a German woman and her 2 daughters walked into the exhibition off the street and came in, and then they left 3.5 hours later. I mean, it was extraordinary because there was this anticipation, and there was an anticipation at one point in the room. You could see all 3 pieces of work. So you were continuously being caught up in one and then seeing something else going on that was interesting, kind of engage in that.
And then what people would see is these drawings of brains and neural pathways and roots that the body has in it. Is that what we would be watching?
Basically, the format of the piece of Magic Forest is it sets you in this environment of the brain, sets you in this location where the neurons grow and grow and grow, and then there are periods of kind of apostosis, cell death, and they are controlled and limited and become more precise, and then they kind of work through this complexity to kind of like a function, like it's like use it or lose it happens in the terms of the cells, and then the story of the piece there's a stroke in the brain and it all returns to black again.
Oh, okay.
Through a process of kind of like, and it was, I suppose it's not ironic, but actually about the same time my mum died of a stroke, very bad stroke.
So it became a very personal piece as well.
It's also a very personal story, like I think in all work, things of like from one's background gets caught up in it, and I think that's why it's difficult sometimes to explain how you do the process or why you do the process, because it is this very, very complicated amalgam of different elements.
Well, and this takes us back to where this conversation started, is that you say that we are so influenced by our surroundings in general. So everything that you do is not just you and your brain doing it. So when you start working on your art pieces, you're much influenced by all the effects from the outer world. So a personal happening in life, or a memory that you have, which is why you're associating something with something differently from what others might do.
Definitely. I mean, this is true. I mean, I'll tell one little thing. After about, drawing neurons, which is this dendritic, this tree-like form, I suddenly remembered that back in like infant school, I'd had this incident happen about doing a drawing and it not being liked by a teacher. And I kind of suddenly thought, I've drawn probably more dendritic forms of trees than anybody, and then shown them in museums. So not just on the wall of a classroom, almost proving that this dendritic formation was a very important one.
I would be very interested actually to have images of your brain when you start working on an artwork. That could be an interesting meta piece of.
Yes. Yeah. When I was working at Queen's Square, they were always looking for volunteers to have their brains scanned and to be tested in a way. I've always kind of wondered quite what my brain was like.
Yeah,
and I find it slightly frightening in a way. I guess that's a kind of an interesting thing, because in that whole period that I've been working, I started working on brains just before year 2000. The whole notion now of kind of being neurodiverse has kind of arisen, and people are comfortable with that. But I've always thought that I was kind of slightly different, and I'm certainly slightly or moderately dyslexic. I have a different way of thinking.
But you did not want that to show on a scan. You were afraid to actually see that there would be these things lighting up on the scan that you were afraid of.
There was a very interesting, jazz musician who was actually, when they did scan his brain, he was one of the best American jazz players. When they did scan his brain, they did find huge lacunas that they could not understand. He was brilliant at the jazz, and I don't know why they scanned him, but it was kind of slightly worrying when they saw him.
Well,
they didn't really kind of understand how the brain could function at that level with that amount of material missing.
no, it is interesting that why are we so fascinated with wanting to understand that? Because probably why they scanned a famous jazz musician's brain is to understand how can you be so brilliant.
Yeah, I think in his case. Yeah, I think in his case that he did have kind of some fits or something like that. There was some other reason that drove it. The work was done by a very interesting neuropsychologist, Paul Brox, from Plymouth, and I can't unfortunately remember the name of the
musician.
Yeah, the musician at this minute.
But it's also something that you seem to want to do. Like there is this notion of self that you have in all your work. So you're very interested in exploring what it means to be human and how we relate to ourselves and the world around us. But then you are scared of having a scan of your own brain. So there is something that you want to keep a distance. You don't want to get into it too deep, or
yes, full of contradictions. Yeah. Maybe I'm comfortable enough now that I wouldn't worry, and maybe it's something I should take up because it would be very interesting material to work with. But definitely, one of the things I realized in my work was that I moved from this kind of looking at specific topics, and then I did begin to realize that what I was looking at was how we see ourselves through science. Mm-hmm. As a very important thing, that actually if we could understand ourselves more, then we might treat each other better and with more consideration, because we're not individuals. We're not bounded at the skin. We are so interconnected with other people in how we're formed and our behaviors. So we're talking about the cats of Hubel and Wiesel, and there was the environment, but take away other people from individuals, humans being brought up, then our brains would develop completely differently. I mean, it's a bit like, the whole brain as a kind of socializing and constructed as a socializing that's so important, that some people consider is a kind of, an issue when you have autism, that socialization aspect of the brain is not working. And some people hypothesize that that's part of what the condition is, that you don't have the kind of streamlining, some of the apostosis doesn't happen in terms of the socialization. Of course, I'm making these statements again. I'm not making them as a scientist, but as an artist. Yeah, and sometimes I'm sure I get things wrong.
Well, and then that's forgiven because you are still the artist. Just don't claim that it's your research and that it's your truth.
Yeah, and that's how I see it. Whenever I describe myself, I am clear that I'm an artist and not a scientist, because I am going to make those alterations to the work that suit the work best more than the science. I'm working in that way of trying to communicate things that are about us as human beings.
Yeah. Can I go back to what you said a few sentences before? Because I think you say that really beautifully, that we are not bounded at the skin. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, that's somebody else's kind of statement. From pheromones, we are reacting with other people chemically. There's suggestions around immunology that we are, choose partners based on smell and fit. So they might have a jigsaw being put together of the immune system. Proposals that like kissing is a way of kind of understanding what your partner is like and whether there is a fit, kiss and things like that. So we're interacting.
And all those interactions, you say, also make you who you are. So you're not bounded in just your body. When you say bounded at the skin, you mean you are not you because of just your body and what happens inside. You're
absolutely yes, and also now, some of the other work I've done has been with heart transplant team, and definitely then who are you if you've got a transplanted heart that's somebody else's, and this brings up many questions about integrity. And I think all the time we go on with that when whatever form of transplant happens, then it's questioning who you are, and we're exchanging continuously. When we go and stay with a friend or whatever, we are taking in and refreshing our biome. Our gut biome is being altered by who we are. I mean, if we, immunologists say, actually, interestingly, that some of the things that are useful for the immune system is to have a pet and a dog, for instance, because we take in some of the microbiome from them. Kissing is important, being in those relations and exchanging and building this immune system. I guess it makes me worry about where we are with cleanliness sometimes, child cleanliness, because children basically probably do need to eat bits of earth and things around in their environment to have this microbiome fed.
Yeah, to grow it, I suppose. It's a way of growing your microbiome to...
Yeah, and there's definitely differences between people that are born by cesarean and vaginal birth. The stress of vaginal birth and the exchange of the microbiome at that point is really important, and it's now why babies are often swabbed if they've been born by cesarean to give them that microbiome.
Okay,
these are very important things. Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. Yeah, that we're structured, but it's not just about our relationship to humans, it's our relationship to the environment, because also we've discovered now that walking, gardening is really important to exchange and improve our microbiome, but walking in nature is basically good for us. It's refreshing that microbiome, which is so important, which seems to be so fundamental in terms of our sensitive, our immune system. And I think one of the other really important topics for me of late is this kind of notion that our microbiome and these things that influence so much in the gut. I mean, there's a natural story for it, because these are the things that as early primitive beings, we were in the sea and we were surrounded by our food source and all of the things that we interacted with, the things that were good and bad. And we did testing through our immune system as to that. But as we move from, to exploit the landmass, we have taken that sea with us in a way. And that's what it is in our gut. Our gut is really not inside us. It's part of outside. And I find that fascinating.
Tell us a bit more about this project that you are currently working on. What is the title of it, and what is it that you're exploring with that microbiome?
Well, yeah, I keep flipping between titles. I mean, I for myself, I have titles that I write on the bits of paper where I'm recording those. So I kind of talk about it for myself as the river flowing through us, or the ocean, the sea that we carry with us. And I think they're kind of really important, because I think that's what it is. We're taking this community of bacteria with us that are so vitally important. And what we need to give, one of the things I think that I think is fundamental in our understanding of self, is that we are conglomerates, and that we are basically hoteliers to the things inside us. We have hospitality that we need to give to our microbiome. We need to look after it, in terms of maybe not too much sugar, in terms of eating kind of things that are kind of, like kombucha and things like that, materials that are kind of vinegar based, and that's important.
I wanted to ask you something about a specific work. You've mentioned it now, I think 2 times already, about your the art project. And what I'm curious about in this one is that you also say that when science produces sets of data, artists can then explore the human domain of it and how it can change you. And I feel that maybe in your heart project, that is something that you've been doing there as well, is that you were looking more to the human side of things, and you were going much further than just the data in it. Can you tell us in this specific project where the science stops and then where you as the artist continued?
It's a difficult boundary, yes, but definitely in the Heart Project, there was this sense of people being connected and how connected they were, and the kind of psychological effects of all of that. So that the team I was working with were in Toronto, in Canada, at the Toronto General Hospital, and project I worked on for 8 or 10 years, following originally people that had transplants, and how I guess they regarded the notion of being hybridity and the kind of pressures that the society put on those people as to whether they've changed.
What do you mean with this hybridity?
Well, in terms of they have, part of somebody else lying and functioning fully inside them, with its set of DNA. There's evidence that some of the DNA spreads throughout the body. It is other. In normal senses, we would consider it other, but it combines with us. And I think that's a really important thing when we talk about the microbiome. This again is other, and all of those bacteria change our state of thinking or being. Definitely, the microbiome is connected with being depressed and lots of other conditions. So chemically they can alter us and change us.
You're really coexisting with them in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We are these collections of things. I mean, right back from the beginning, the thing that drives our energy is the mitochondria, and the mitochondria has a completely different set of. It's not a human DNA. It's not our DNA. So when you begin to look at it, that's really important. In fact, if you measure the human body, the bacteria's DNA is more DNA, more type or forms of it than our own human DNA in us. So if you were simply to mash somebody up, measure the DNA, somebody might think that we were bacteria rather than human. I mean, I think that's really fascinating. And by volume of I think there's 30. We have 30 trillion human cells, but inside us, on average, there are 38 trillion bacterial cells in us, which is just like, wow, that's incredible. Yeah. I mean, in that sense, that's why I think this kind of sense of self has to change. We're biology. We're not independent of the world. We're interconnected so deeply with the world, and I think these were things that began to arise in the Heart Project, or further, kind of, for me to understand.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about what happened in that Heart Project. So this was a project about heart transplantations. There was research being done on heart transplantations. And then where did you come in?
Yeah, it was a kind of worry by a team which was sort of driven by a philosopher, actually, who was talking to some of the major players in this transplant team in Toronto. That it was quite evident that in the circumstances of people being talked to in the hospital, they seemed quite well and very thankful for their lives being saved by in a sense, the heart being given by a donor. So this sense of being very appreciative. But these same people seem to be struggling mentally. And there was a difference between how they reported to maybe the surgeons and how they were talking to the nurses. And I think that was one of the schisms that arose, how they were coping. And a lot more nurses maybe felt that there was a lot more depression and a lot more difficulties in handling this. And so the team originally set out to try to have protocols to make things better. That you couldn't really explain heart transplants as maybe it had been before. There's simply an exchange of a car part, like it was just exchanging a motor pump. Sorry, it's not just simple. It's just not a mechanical thing. There's a lot more emotional things that are going to come with this.
Emotional and psychological changes that people go through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you deal with this? And I think the team originally believed that, they needed ways of working with those patients to give a better understanding of some of the elements of change that they might experience later, because you couldn't ignore it. It was there. And so this team were talking to people outside, videoing them, looking at their gestures and how they were in themselves as measures of how they were, and then trying to put together help in forms. And it's a real struggle, really, for them. People were sometimes misled by the thought of the type of heart that they'd received, because there's anonymity. Some people, there was a gentleman that said, I've received the heart of a young woman and I feel very energetic, and that's just really good. And yet the team knew that actually it was kind of slightly, it was the heart from an older gentleman.
Interesting.
So there's a kind of psychological element. I mean, again, about a Hindu man where in Hindu religion, it's very much, there's not the concept of brain death, it's heart death. So if he hadn't his own heart, who was he any longer? I mean, these are kind of internal questions that you had to ask and think about.
I remember you saying that then that person feels like they lost their soul and they had a different soul.
Might be evidence of that. And certainly I think, there's a lot of kind of psychological things fed by newspapers and films about how your character might change. Brief thoughts are as if you take something and change it, which is quite a large organ, the heart. it has been developed within a body and developed certain kind of requirements, almost nutritional requirements. I think that might lead to some kind of physiological changes in its host as well, that it has a particular kind of drive to exist in a certain kind of environment and to have a certain kind of energy need or whatever. Probably does lead to some form of changes. They're not as big as some of the what we call red top newspapers here, the more scandalous newspapers suggest, but some mild alterations that you might need to think about.
And so what do you feel your role as an artist can be in a research like this? Why were you included in this? And then how did you translate all this information into an artwork?
The philosopher Margaret Shildrick and a part of the kind of more softer end of the science team were very interested in how other people were engaged in the topic. And so 4 artists, 2 from Canada and 2 from the UK, were brought into that project to explore those ideas. And I think there was a lot of skepticism from the kind of hands-on end of the team, the people that did the surgery, but the people at the other end realized, how effective we might be. And it was, we had some hostility from the higher end when we first went into the team.
Okay.
But full acceptance in the end when they began to see what further topics were brought up by the interaction of those patients, those people that had heart transplants, what they saw in the work and how it shifted, how it opened up conversations. And in fact, for a year, we didn't speak to the lead person from the heart transplant team until they invited some people along and they came themselves and experienced their patients reacting with the artwork, the artworks. And then everything completely changed. Suddenly we found ourselves from almost being rejected to being part of the team, and then without us even knowing, putting us into grant applications. So it was a real transformation as they realized what this interaction was.
I had that as a question, actually, if you feel that your artwork has influenced science or scientific research because of the questions you pose with it. But I guess this is the answer. In this case, it really had.
I think there are little bits of that. Yeah, I'm not, I wouldn't push that too far. But I think overall the influence of my kind of work with science has, been helpful. I mean, just in terms of the volume of, over 30 years of teaching students and the number of talks I've given, the number of all of these things, the number of exhibitions, just those conversations and the looking at the work and what topics it arises. The fact I'm talking about some of these results here has effect.
Yeah.
I think with the scientists, I've always been interested in. They're very keen to talk to us in a way, and it's very interesting conversations. And I think it's because we come with other sets of criteria other than other scientists talking to them. I mean, there's a different way of communicating, maybe less pressure. And I'm sure that with Richard Wingate, who I've mentioned a couple of times at King's, and Lee Wilson, who's a person that works with him there, since about 2020, so it's 26 years, I'm still working with them on projects. They call us back. They want to have those conversations because it reaches out into community in a way.
Yeah, because I wanted to ask, with this heart project, how did you visualize it? So when you say that the patients got to interact with the work, what is it that they were interacting with? Well, what did you make?
Yeah, I made a series of videos where I took some of those underlying kind of things that I saw, ideas that I thought about. When I was looking at the videos, we had access to this whole series of videos that had been made of the patients being interviewed, and we were analysing them with the team effectively. And I made lots of drawings through that process.
And these were drawings of the people in conversation?
They were drawings about ideas. I basically had an outline of a figure that I just continuously worked on, drawing onto them with the kind of things, how I thought that they'd have been altered or changed or things that happened. And then I worked with those drawings into making a piece of work that included all those drawings. And then in terms of the structure of it, I was concerned that it was quite a thing to see. So it was a dual video projection. So when it's shown on the wall, it's at least 12 meters wide. So in a way, as a viewer, you couldn't take it in all in. So you were continuously kind of struggling to follow it. And it kind of expressed this breakdown of like the relationship between just following one thing. You needed to follow all of the figures in it, even though the figures were all the same person. Your idea about that person would be dispersed, diffused. You wouldn't be able to contain it within the body. In a sense, that was one thing. I made other pieces. I made a series of soap hearts about the cleanliness and the worries of the transplant and the immune issues.
And these were all part of the same exhibition?
Yeah, we did a couple of exhibitions. We moved, the team started looking at the recipients of hearts, the hybrid bodies, but there was a great deal of concern about the donor family and their reaction and their difficulty of a loved one basically dying and where the heart goes. And the issue of the recipient often needing to write a letter back to the donor family, and the difficulties that caused was a big part of the research for a period. We had people that tried probably maybe every day for a year to write a letter back to the donor family, and would screw it up and say that I can't express my thanks or my relationship. And the issue of the donor family often wanting to have a relationship with the recipient. And sometimes that's appropriate or not appropriate.
Because they felt that they would have a relationship with that heart.
Yes, and they wanted the heart to go to a good place. And in this difficult world of of needing a heart, that's not always going to be, true. So how does that work? How do you warn people that it might not, that your daughter's heart might not go to a home in a sense that you are happy with? You don't like their lifestyle. You don't like many things about it.
Do you feel that you found out in this project why the heart as an organ is maybe so much more emotional to give to another person than other organs?
I don't completely know. I mean, I think it's just our history, isn't it, of the heart. It goes back so long, isn't it, to Inca celebrations and all sorts of things. That the heart, the beat of the heart, that is this essential.
Yeah, the beating makes it alive. Maybe is that maybe what it is?
Yes, the rhythm which comes through in our dance and so many things, cultural things, and the fact that often if we lie with somebody, then we are listening to their heart or we're feeling the pulse, which I think is a very interesting thing. If somebody has a mechanical heart, then you don't get that beat. So what is it like lying by a lover if you don't have a heartbeat? It's kind of some interesting kind of social questions. So I don't think we ever got to the bottom of it. But some of the issues, I had a friend artist who had a kidney transplant who felt that they had suffered some of the same questioning and body, mental breakdown from other organs. I think it's true of lots of things when we think about it. It's this boundary, this difficulty.
I want to talk to you about one more of your works, and I will let you choose which one you'd like to talk about a little bit. I want to say Limb for Limb or Being Human. Which one do you think is more fitting for this conversation?
Limb for Limb, I think, is quite interesting. I mean, I'm a bit, I'm questioning my own beliefs on it. Limb for Limb, I made where did I make it? For the RSU, which is an anatomical museum in Riga in Latvia. And it was out of a project that I've been working with, some people I've been working with called Anatomy and Beyond. Mm-hmm. And Beyond, for me, in the sense of it was about going into space, how our bodies and how our anatomy might change under those circumstances. And what I became interested in was some experiments done at NASA, twin experiments with two identical brothers, one who had been into space and one who always remained on Earth, and looking at their anatomy in close and defined ways to see whether there were differences.
And there are differences.
Full differences and changes in gravity, some changes seemingly in DNA. They do repair on return, but they are significant. And so I just became interested and made a piece about that on meteorological balloons, one expressing my feelings about one brother's anatomy and the other one expressing or having elements of the other other's anatomy. And I kind of like this, and the balloons kind of have a breath to them as well. They blow up and come down.
Because you have fans placed in them, so they're constantly moving around a little bit. So there's a bit of a body morphing happening.
Absolutely, yeah. They come to life and deflate and come to life. And the fans coming on is determined. They're triggered by passive infrared detectors. So people in the room affect how they work and whether they come up. And I suppose if we go back, and I guess these changes worried me in a sense that we, have a lot of work going on trying to maybe get people into space and to live in space, but we do seemingly seem so tied to this kind of environment. I just question it in a way.
With this environment, you mean?
We live in now. I mean, imagine if to go to some of these further planetary systems and whatever, you would need generations to be brought up. And yet our babies, our children are growing up in these environments where we've talked about picking up dirt, this hurting themselves. It's such a complex kind of set of interreactions that makes us human. Yeah. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And the notion that we could replicate that, though I think even last night I was thinking, well, maybe, we would just evolve differently, I guess. But whether,
But I think this is it's a beautiful thought that you actually pose with this project, because you are saying that our human bodies and everything that comes with it are really built for this specific world, for this planet, and only with these characteristics that this planet can give us. So if we would go to another planet, that will be extremely complex, because then everything in our bodies and everything around it will have to adjust, and to get these nuances right will be super difficult as well. Yeah. How do you explore this idea further in your work?
Absolutely. I mean, it is this, that we are completely tied in our making to this place and this place alone, and actually replicating it. And when we look at the barrenness of all of the other planets and whatever that we've explored, this Earth is so complex. When we see David Attenborough films about the natural world, what an extraordinary place it is. And that we are all so tied up in it. We're tied up in the microbiome. We're tied up in these interrelated trees that we now know talk to each other through kind of mycelium and the root systems and define each other. And, I'm sure that all of that feeds into us, and we have similar network systems in us. I find it amazing.
Our neurological pathways that we see then also translated in the tree and its roots and the mycelial network. So
this mirroring that we have, and that we are integrated into plants in some kind of way. Plant matter is so important to us. The correlations are so strong. I think it's kind of very beautiful and extraordinary, and we need to work very much on how we are on this planet and our interactions with everybody in daily life and local people and all of these things. We need to kind of explore that to make things better for us, in a way.
How do you think we can do that?
I think we have to do it. Where we are presently, we certainly can't trust our governments to do it. We have to do it and set out ourselves. And I think as individuals, we have a lot of strength. And if we just do it at a personal level of understanding who we are and how we're related, that we are related to gardening, and take up some of these activities that are so obvious about exercise, about how we interrelate with different people. I just have to do things at a local level, really. I think that's where it comes down to. We've given too much credence, to this other world to provide for us. I think we've been misled by advertising a great deal into what a life is.
How so?
Well, it just talks about products. It sets up this is what a good life is. Having 2 cars, spraying yourself with this or that, taking this, doing that. We've been brainwashed. The most pleasurable things probably are just, sitting with other friends and having some experiences and having dinner. And it doesn't matter where the dinner comes from. If you cook it or you get it as a takeaway, it might have different health and nutritional values, but it's that kind of conversation, other working with each other. We will have better exchanges of microbes, and I think we need to center where we are happy. And I think we're doing damage to the planet at the moment at such a rate that we need to work against that. It's very difficult, and I know that I'm caught up in that kind of measures of production and things like that.
It is extremely difficult. How do you feel that your artwork can contribute to this?
I don't. It worries me. It worries me. Yeah, a little bit in terms of the conversations that it might happen. We're often not changed by dictators. We are changed by small conversations, and I think that the artwork in communities and small communities, not necessarily some of the grand artworks that we have, but talking and participation is really important.
Your art works as conversation pieces to understand ourselves and our connection to everything much better.
Yes, I mean, I see them as kind of philosophical discussions about the world. They're about ideas. They're about things that we don't understand, because we are reading the world, only in terms of our conscious aspect, but we know we're reading the world in a much deeper way in our unconscious. And it's a bit like when we were talking about the Heart Project and the videos. So much of that was not just about what was being said by the people. It was about their gestures, how they looked, how they were sitting in the seat. Some of them were definitely saying, slumped over, arms wrapped around them, saying, "Oh, I'm very good. I'm happy with my heart. Sorry, everything about your gesture, your position, your place." They're saying, "No, you're not happy. We need, you need help. You need to talk to somebody about these issues."
Yeah, so you're saying there's a whole unconscious processing also always happening, and in the Heart Project, this one came more clear.
Yes, yeah, definitely, and also that's where art works. It works best when it expresses something that you can't. It's not literal. It has elements that have come from your soul. You have a deeper understanding of something. So I think it works with a different, in a wider kind of. It's a real broadband. It's not narrow. It asks these questions, and we don't know quite what we're expressing. But I think it is about communication, joining groups, kind of understanding, changing things. Hopefully.
If I would ask you a name, an artist, book, plant, idea, or something that you feel everyone should know about, like what is something that inspires you these days?
Oh dear. I would have needed some warning for that. But I do think this concept that we carry the sea with us is a really interesting thing. In our emergence, we carry with us all of our background, in a sense, and the sea is a kind of the gut and the sea and the water element of our bodies is a very profound thing, and something that if we could begin to think about that, if we begin to think about ourselves as hoteliers of looking after a system, not only do we need to look after the system of the environment outside us, but we need to look after our internal system. That would be very important. And I'm sure in some book or some fascinating thing I've read, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. If I would ask you to give us a souvenir from this journey that we have now been on, from this conversation. So other than this inspiration of seeing the concept of ourselves as carrying the sea, is there a souvenir, something that we can do today or experience a bit of your wonderment and your philosophy as well?
It was a difficult one. But what came to mind immediately as a kind of object I would kind of pass on, as part of a kind of messing around with work, and I made some kind of life-size soap babies.
Okay.
And I would give you one of those. In a way, I mean, I know that's a strange.
With what message?
With what message? Well, about tenderness and about understanding, because there was a kind of an irony in them when I made them. Because originally I made soap hearts that would be worn away, and I thought that was quite interesting. So they were laid out; they were actually on the counter surfaces in the museum of the sinks in the washrooms, and people were to use them. And I went from that to making these soap babies, which was also a kind of homage to the birth of my daughter.
But also to handle with care.
Also to realize that we're part of a system. Because if you were to use one of those soap babies, this thing that you would care for, and I sometimes take them when I visit schools or colleges to teach, and I hand them around, and everybody, cossets them. They instantly want to look after them. But also, if you were to use them in a sink or a bathroom, you'd be caring for it, but you'd also be washing it away. And I think that's the irony of our lives, that we disappear. We're starting to disappear from the very moment we're conceived. From the very moment that our mitochondria kick in, they are producing things in our cells which will eventually be our demise. And I think it's a very beautiful poetry. And that these soap babies, in a way, but for me, a summary of that. You care for something, but it's disappearing. It's not the same.
It's an inevitable cycle of life, I suppose.
Yes, it is. Yes, cycles of life, and we should just kind of accept that. Though I will have the same difficulties as everybody else in accepting that.
I think that's a beautiful souvenir to take with us, and maybe I will one day have an actual soap baby in my hands. That would be...
Yes, you can. On my website there somewhere, there's some photographs of them.
I want to thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure to philosophize a bit with you, and I recommend everyone to have a look at your website, because there's so many more projects that you've done. You've worked with so many different mediums, and I wish you all the luck with future projects, because I feel like you will be continuing and you'll always have 10 things happening at the same time.
Well, thank you, Daphne. I mean, I think, it's a pleasure to be, it's one of these things that I was talking about. Conversations are so important. It allows you to kind of get into the conscious, kind of what you do think about things, what is central, what is important. And I'll now have to go away and think about these objects, sort of desert island objects. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to The Art of Coexistence, a podcast produced by our Celian publishers. Editing by Axel Fruman, music by Mark Omen, and hosted by me, Daphne Fruman. Find us on your favorite podcast app and give us a follow, like, subscribe, and/or share, and we'll see you again soon.